When I first moved to Orlando, I got a job at a local company and needed to find a place to live. At the time, I was renting a room from a nice older couple. However, I was also getting married, so I needed to find a place for both of us to live. Those that live in Orlando know how expensive it can be, and I'm not much of an apartment guy. So finally, we found this nice little house. And when I say little, I mean little. Anyway, the landlord gave us a great deal because he didn't want to really spend any time fixing it up, because it wasn't worth it. After all, it was really small and really old. They had just moved his wife's mother to an elderly home, and he did fix the electrics and plumbing. I agreed that I would paint and fix things up so long as the basics worked. He was a really nice landlord, and we got along great. A few weeks after we moved in, the wife came by and let us know they would be away for a bit. Turns out, her mom passed away a few days ago, and they were taking her back to the old country. I felt bad. I didn't know that she was sick, and we moved into her house. After that, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but the air about the house changed a little. Or at least I thought. Anyway, shortly later I got married, and we settled into our daily lives. Well, I was walking on the front porch when I found a small brooch under one of the rotten boards. It was pretty nice and brought it inside and placed it on the mantel. I figured I would give it to the landlord the next time I see him because it was most likely either Lillian's or his wife's. That was when things started to get weird. The first thing I started noticing, or more to the point my wife noticed and blamed me, was that the keepsakes from our wedding, champagne glasses, knives, photos, etc., got moved around and were not where she left them. I said I had nothing to do with them moving, but her wasn't having any of it. So we moved them back. A few days later, we came home from dinner, and there they were, rearranged again. So I looked over her and asked her how I did it this time. The brooch was still in the same place on the mantel, but everything else had been moved around. That would happen a few more times until my wife got over it and left them where they got moved to. One day I was dusting. Yeah, I know, a guy that dusts. Hey, I had to do something to stay on her good side, lol. And came across the brooch on the mantel. And I looked at it, a breeze went by. It was just a fan. But that got me thinking about the odd things that have been happening. I started to think that maybe the events were Lillian's doing. I asked my wife what she thought, and she said that it was crazy. She is right, I am not the point though. And the ghost of the old lady that lived here was haunting the house and moving the wedding stuff around. Well, yeah, I said. She gave me that look and walked away. Anyway, the following weekend, the landlord came by to mow, and I went outside to give back the brooch, thinking that would change anything. His wife was in the truck reading a book, and I walked over and handed her the brooch to her. Well, she turned about 10 shades of white and looked up at me and asked where I found it. I told her that I found it under the porch when I was fixing the floor. She said that this was her mother's, and that she had lost it when she was a kid, and her mother was very mad at her for playing with it and losing it. She smiled and the colour returned to her face and hugged me, and then I walked back to the house. As I walked up to the front, I looked at the house and noticed that in the front window there was a shadow behind the lace curtains, and it looked maybe like a person. As I walked closer, I tripped over a rock, and when I looked up, she wasn't there. I went into the house and looked around and didn't see anything, so I moved on a light through and lace thing. A few days later I got home and my wife starts rambling on about do I smell the flowers? And she thinks we have mice or rats because she keeps hearing movement. I say no, and I poke her a bit and say does it sound like little feet or footsteps? She looks at me and says footsteps. After that, the events got more frequent and interesting. I'd be sitting on the couch, and at the corner of my eye, movement or a change of light. Not quite a shadow, but almost going from the kitchen to the bathroom, which is a straight shot, and there isn't any way light can move that way back there. There were other things like strange sounds of things moving in the kitchen or the back bedroom, a lot of footsteps. The whole house is hardwood floors. It really carried. Little things like that, we never got touched or anything bad ever happened to either of us. I decided that Lillian was still here, even after the brooch event. Maybe she was happy that I gave it back to her daughter, but it was still her house, so I figured she was well within her right to live here too. And besides, I love the way she messed with my wife. She is so easy. It even got to the point where sometimes I'd talk to Lillian. Never got a response back, and that was before cell phones or voice recorders were as high tech as they are now. I'm not sure who she messed with more, me or my wife. We stayed in that house for 6 years and had 2 kids in that house before we moved to another city. Shortly after we moved out, the landlord called and asked if anything strange had happened to us while we were in the house. I told him that his mother in law was still around and that she was super cool. He then said that what he thought, because they were in the repainting and running ceiling fans, and they both had run ins with something strange. I told him that she was good to us and that we missed living there. I hung up the phone, and that was the last time I ever heard from him. I found out a few years later from some friends that the house was torn down and a new house had been put in its place, way bigger than the original. I was a bit sad, but then I thought that Lillian might not like that very much, and that I hope she rearranges everything in the new house and drives the new owners crazy like it did my wife. Lol. I live in Pica, Ohio. When I was in my late teens to early 20s, in 410 East Ash Street, which was a 2-story house with 4 bedrooms, a living room, dining room, 2 bathrooms, a dirt floor basement, a tunnel that looked like it was used in the Underground Railroad, and was built in the early 1900s after the Great Flood of 1913. There was a house that sat in the same spot as the house of mine that was built in 1832, but the flood destroyed it. The house always had an eerie vibe, but I never believed in ghosts because I figured if ghosts were real, my grandma would have come to see me. Furthermore, we lived in this house for about a year. Nothing ever happened until one night my wife's sister came running to us, saying that something chased her up the stairs and then wiggled the door handle. They were always getting drunk, so I laughed and said, "Stacy, you're always getting drunk on the weekends. I was probably just imagining things." So a week went by and our 5-year-old said, "There were legs with no body following you and Mom into the bathroom." Shivers went up my spine, even though I figured it was just his imagination, because like I said, I was a skeptic. I told him he was probably just scared because of the story his Aunt Stacy had told, so again, I shrugged it off. Then one night, my wife wakes me up and says, "Do you hear the TV knocking?" I said, "No, it's probably just making that cracking noise when a TV goes off and still has some power." This was an old tube television that only came on and off by a knob on the TV itself. So again, I shrugged it off. A couple weeks went by and I got off work after a 12-hour shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Don't you just love them hours? Well, I sat down at the dining room table and was relaxing when all of a sudden I heard little kids running around laughing upstairs. I went to my wife. She was sleeping on the lazy boy because she would not sleep upstairs after hearing the knocking on the TV. I said after shaking her awake, "Tiff, why are Sydney and Travis running around upstairs?" She was like, "They're not in there. They're in the floor asleep under the covers." Sure enough, to my surprise, there they were. So I ran upstairs and looked. No, of course, but all the windows were open. It was a school day, and it was that time for kids to go to school, so I figured I was just tired and just heard kids from outside. Fast forward about a week, when me and my wife were arguing. I'm yelling at her, she's yelling at me. I tell her to go turn the damn TV off. When I do, I notice a shadow that's about 7 foot tall in the shape of a person. I'm getting goosebumps now just remembering it in my head. But at the time, seeing it, I figured it was just a shadow from something reflecting from the TV. Then she turned it off, and it was still there, so I waited for her to walk back in front of it. Might I add, it's so dark I can't see my hand in front of my face. To see if when she did, if the shadow changed shape, but it didn't. I yelled to my wife, "There was something in behind you," and then she jumped in the bed and up under the covers. As I kept my eye on it as quick as a lightning flash, the shadow darker than the dark rushed towards the TV and turned on the TV. It was just like a movie. A black mist went into the TV and turned it. I could not believe my eyes. I quickly turned on the light and told my wife to turn the TV off because the shadow was looking at me. We kept the light on and slept with it on. The next morning, I still didn't believe it, so I asked my wife if she remembered it. That's the day I knew ghosts or whatever it was that did not exist, did exist. A few years after moving out of the house, we started delivering newspapers for the Pika Daily Call, and it had an issue that was dedicated to the people of the 1913 flood. In the paper, it had our house, and the address said 2 little girls had drowned on the property there before. Just still thinking about it gives me chills. I was 17, asleep in my bed. I felt the corner of my bed dip. I kept my eyes closed, thinking, someone kicked my bed to wake me up. For whatever reason, I thought to myself that if I just pretend to be asleep, maybe they will let me get a few more minutes sleep while I was waking up. Then I felt the bed dip more, and I felt it was someone crawling up towards me and straddling me. I'm fully awakened by this, 100% no question. And the only person who would do that was my girlfriend. So I said her name, my eyes still closed, thinking she would just crawl in, realizing I was just waking up. No answer. And about then, I felt something was horribly wrong. For no reason, dread washed over me. I had that sensation you get when someone is close to your face. That weird sound blocking silence when someone is in your personal space. When I said her name again, there was no reply. I immediately swung with a right hook so hard that the momentum literally made me fall out of bed. I fully expected to connect with someone. Imagine my shock and confusion as I was tumbling out of bed. I must have missed, I thought. With my adrenaline coursing through my veins, I looked around in the dark for someone to fight. Flipping on lights, there was no one there. It was like 3:20 in the morning, and I didn't go back to sleep that night. What scared me most is I was awake and I was not dreaming at all. No question in my mind. Obviously, I wasn't paralyzed by sleep paralysis because I, at will, threw a punch at full strength and I never had the sensation I couldn't move. It's the only reason I've had in my life to give me a thought that there might be something to paranormal experiences. So back in 2017, I decided I'd had enough of the lifestyle I was living. I'd finished university, but hadn't got anywhere with my degree, and decided a change was necessary. This change came in the form of moving to France to do a winter season and test my luck at snowboarding. Myself and an old friend quickly found jobs as chalet hosts and relocated to Chamonix, France. Our little apartment was based at the bottom of Mount Brevant, and we shared this with 3 other girls. For a bit of context, the layout of the apartment meant that me and my friend shared a room, then 2 other girls shared a room opposite from ours, and then the final girl, who was also acting supervisor, had her own section of the apartment, complete with a separate kitchen and bathroom to the ones us 4 shared. After a few weeks, my friend got a boyfriend and began staying at his place most nights. Once this started, I began having odd dreams. In these dreams, I would be flying around the room backwards, able to see myself asleep on the bed, but not able to slow down or control myself shooting around the room and under the bed and back out again. This was a little scary, but I was smoking a lot and just put it down to lucid dreaming. I'm familiar with astral projecting, but again, just thought it was from the smoke. On one of these nights, whilst zooming around my bedroom asleep, I saw that there was a shadow in the corner of the room watching me sleep. When I looked back down at myself, I saw both my legs raised in the air in an awkward position. I quickly woke up, found that my legs were actually in that position. This creeped me the hell out, as I'd never experienced anything like this before. Creepy, yes, but not the scariest part, yet. One night, my friend was staying at her boyfriend's, as was one of the other girls, and the supervisor was out having drinks at her friend's. The other girl from opposite me, let's call her Charlotte, had gone out for a drink, but due to having to get up early the next day, decided to come home at around 11 pm. This was a decision she later came to regret. So, let's skip to the following morning. I'd woken up after a great night's sleep and was coming out of my room to go to the bathroom. Before making it in, Charlotte swung open her door in floods of tears. I mean, this was a girl I'd only known a couple of weeks, and we were not at that point of feeling comfortable enough to cry to one another, so this did catch me off guard. I managed to calm her down to the point of being able to speak coherently, which was when she told me everything that unfolded that night. Now, this is going to sound like some horror movie ripoff, because it sounds too made up to be real. But this girl would have gained nothing from making up such a story, not to mention the crying. She explained that she was asleep, and in her dream, she got a bee stuck in her hair, and the buzzing was so intense it woke her up. Only, the buzzing didn't stop when she awoke. As she scanned her room for the source of the sound, she saw a woman stood at the foot of her bed and blocking the door. Initially, she thought that my friend had come home drunk and stumbled into the wrong room. But after calling her name and her eyes adjusting to the darkness, she realized this wasn't the case. Instead, an unknown woman glared down at her. She began shouting at her to leave, but the woman simply crossed her arms and smirked mockingly at Charlotte. After a few moments of being mocked, she plucked up the courage to lunge at the light switch, which was to the side of where the woman was stood. And as if by magic, she disappeared. Charlotte was understandably shook up at this point and left the light on to try to comfort herself. Only, this wasn't the end of her waking nightmare. With the lights on and sat up in her bed, she watched as the blanket began to pull off her. This happened continuously. Every time she would pull the cover back up, it would be pulled back down and eventually would be pulled completely off her, landing at the other side of the room. She explained how she was frozen and spent the rest of the night sat up in bed with the lights on, crying. During this period, she heard laughs of mocking and just waited for the moment she heard someone else awake in the apartment. This being me. She later told me how she was sensitive to ghosts, with this not being her only experience. She spoke of a time when she was younger and would tell her mum about the boy in the wall in her house. A concerned mum arranged for a priest and psychic to visit the house, where it was discovered that a boy had died in the property, and his remains were found in the walls of the house. They had to get police involvement, although it was determined that the body was 100+ years old. Her family home was a converted nunnery, and there had been reports of lots of abuse happening within the convent. Her mum later paid a visit during the season and confirmed all of this. Needless to say, I was scared by these events, even though they didn't happen to me directly. I spent the rest of the season in fear of the next time I would be in the apartment on my own, not wanting to meet the ghost lady. After this, no one witnessed any more strange occurrences, despite us being there another 5 months after this happening. The most that happened was hearing a door slam shut, which I quickly brushed off as wind, even though no doors or windows were open. I was under the belief of not giving it any attention in the hope that it wouldn't fuel it to do any more. We spoke to our boss, who owned the property, and although concerned at what he had seen, he did express that no other seasonaries had mentioned anything of the sorts happening. I thought about this for a long time after, wanting more answers as to who this woman was. The only explanation I could come up with is that around a 10-minute walk away from our apartment there was this cemetery. In this cemetery there was a wall dedicated to all who had lost their lives exploring the mountain. There were individuals from all over the world who had come to this area to explore the mountains, but weren't lucky enough to make it back home. I believe this woman was an English explorer who had lost her life there and was drawn to Charlotte not only because she was sensitive to these things, but also because the woman was trapped in a country where few would understand her to communicate. Either way, this was a scary experience to all involved, and has only piqued my interest in the paranormal further. The first grocery store that I worked at was haunted. To give a little bit of background information, but not enough for the place to be identified, I'd rather not get into any issues with the family who owns it. The store has been around since the 50s and was started by the parents of the current owners. Their mother, in particular, worked there for a very long time, basically until she was unable to. She seemed to genuinely love that store and loved to help people. After her unfortunate passing, people began to notice her presence in the place, though I'm not sure anyone wanted to let the family know, since it seems a little bit insulting to just out and say that their deceased mother is still working. In 2009, at the same store, I was hired to work as a cashier, and later as a member of the grocery department staff, stocking shelves and cleaning and such things. Of course, normally during the day the haunting went completely unnoticed, and most nights it did too. The spirit was quiet and friendly, luckily, but I hadn't encountered her until one night I was the last one out of the floor after closing, straightening the shelves in the aisles while everyone else wrapped up counting down the cash drawers and finishing inputting data in the office computers. While moving slowly through the aisles, straightening product and bringing it out to the front of the shelves, I got that peculiar, prickly feeling of being watched. I had heard the stories before, cooler doors latching and unlatching audibly with only one person in the building who was nowhere near to them, inexplicable sounds at certain places in the store, but these thoughts hadn't even crossed my mind for several weeks leading up to this incident. I immediately knew this wasn't a coworker because I could hear all of them talking and laughing in the office. I was often the last person out on the floor facing in the evenings when I closed, being one of the lower ranking people there, so that was no surprise. I glanced around quickly and noted that no one was anywhere near me, but when I faced to the front again, it felt distinctly like someone was immediately behind me, peering over my shoulder. I thought I'd be friendly and talk to it, just to ease my own anxiety. "Hello," I said, trying not to let my voice betray my nervous state. "I'm just straightening things up before we leave for the night. Don't mind me." Maybe half a minute more passed as the spirit seemed to continue peering over my shoulder. The sensation was eerie, but the feeling I got from the entity itself was just one of curiosity, as though it was making sure that I was putting things back correctly. Suddenly, I caught a motion out of the corner of my left eye towards the front of the store, and I turned my head just in time to see a white woman with light clothing and light coloured hair walking busily across the front of the store toward the front entrance. At this point, we had been closed for at least 15 to 20 minutes, and this being a very small store with very few hiding spots, I assumed it was my coworker who had been the last cashier of the day walking up front. I tried to ignore the hammering in my chest as I called out her name and headed to the front, thinking she had accidentally left something up there and was going back to get it. I froze when I heard her voice responding from the back office, asking me what I needed. Now my heart was really pounding. I thought there was someone in the store who wasn't supposed to be there, so I snapped out of my shock and ran the last few steps to the front to see who was there. Nothing and no one was there. Not wanting to be taken by surprise, I did a cursory glance at all the main places that a person would have been able to hide in the few seconds between when I saw them and when I arrived at the front of the store. There was still nothing. The prickly sensation returned and I jogged back to the office, still not quite willing to acknowledge what I had seen. I asked the cashier. I thought I saw what it was she had been looking for up front, just hoping she was secretly a world-class sprinter and I just didn't know about it. But she had been in the office the entire time. There were only three other people in the building besides her and I, and none of the other three there even looked close to the person that I saw. Also, when comparing my memory to the appearance of the cashier, the person I had seen was much taller than her. Additionally, I couldn't remember hearing a single sound from that person as they walked quickly across the front of the registers. I asked if one of the guys would go back up front with me and make sure that we were really the only ones there, but both of them kind of shrugged it off and shuffled uncomfortably, saying that if I couldn't find them, there was no one there after all. I've never seen our closing crew wrap up the last few items on the to-do list so quickly as we did that night. I still find it a little funny that I was so afraid in the moment, The spirits seemed kind and thoughtful, and maybe even helpful. I think that the disappearing act shocked me at the time, but after that, I was actually more comfortable at night having seen her ghost and knowing she was completely harmless. I grew up in the 1980s and 90s. I was born in 83. One day, as a young kid, 5 years old, I was at my friend Josh's house. He lived two doors up, which for me was as far as I could go on either side of my house at 5 years old. Luckily, all of my closest friends as a kid lived within that quadrant. Josh and I were in his basement, which was a finished basement that had a heather brown carpet, a nice large fireplace, and a big TV in the main room of the basement. We would often be down there in the morning, just before or after breakfast, as Mum would be watching me in the morning. We grew up around older kids, and I had two older brothers myself, so we often heard of freaky ghost stories, even at a young age. But nothing really similar to what we saw that day, what our childhood minds ultimately dubbed the blonde thing. We were playing with action figures and watching TV. I remember us laughing and playing, and we both noticed movement about 10 feet away from us at the other side of the room. We were the only ones in the basement. His mom was right near the top of the stairs in the kitchen with his baby brother Nathan. We both just looked toward the motion to see a very short, about 3.5 foot tall, humanoid figure going around the corner down the short hallway to the back basement bedroom. She was bobbing her head from side to side as she rounded the corner. We saw her for maybe 3 seconds. I say she and her because what we saw of the figure was long curly light blonde hair, almost white, draped over her shoulders and her back. The hair was so long that it was almost to the floor. She was bobbing / bouncing her head from shoulder to shoulder like a kid would be if she was skipping and playing. We both screamed and ran upstairs as fast as we could. I didn't see a face or clothes. All we really saw was the long hair draped over what was clearly a small human girl-shaped figure. We didn't know what to really describe how or what to call it, but Shorty talked about it, and we always referred it to as the blonde thing. Now, this happened in 1988. In 2018, I hadn't forgotten about the blonde thing since the last time I mentioned it, probably 15 years ago, and hadn't thought about it as long. Josh sent me a friend request on Facebook after not having heard from each other since the mid-90s in middle school. He messaged me on Facebook, and when I opened it, it was the "Hey, how have you been doing, dude?" kind of letter. But at the end, he wrote, "Remember the blonde thing?" I felt like the adults in the movie It must have felt when they got the phone call where Mike tells them it's back. The memory just came flooding back. The crazy thing is we saw it one other time, outside, in the backyard of our neighbour's Leoda's house. No shit, same thing. Literally saw her skipping, short-figured with the almost white hair down to the ground, going to the wood line behind the house. I attempted to do research to see if other people had ever sighted similar creatures or entities. The closest thing I could find is some old Germanic folklore about long blonde-haired entities that look like girls who try to steal babies from houses. Curious as if to see if anyone has seen something similar. Thanks. I've never experienced anything paranormal, but my parents have. I'm going to share one of those stories here. My mom said she experienced something she couldn't explain sometime in the 80s when she was in high school. This was in Chittagong, Bangladesh. My grandmother's house is on a mountain. My mom lived with her siblings on the second floor apartments of their building. They were all listening to music. In our culture, it's generally considered unsafe to play music at night because locals believe it attracts ghosts and spirits nearby. My mom said they were all sitting around the circular dining table, eagerly listening to a famous flute player on the radio. She decided to get up and go to the bathroom across the hall. As she proceeded to walk, within 10 seconds she was on the ground. She felt a huge slap across the face and fell to the ground in front of the bathroom. Her brothers saw her and ran to help her up. They couldn't lift her up. They both fell next to her. It was shocking because my mom was a skinny girl at the time and barely 5 feet tall. My uncles were bodybuilders and couldn't even lift her arm above the ground. My mom said that as she was lying there, she could see a figure in front of her. He had multiple faces and had not foul smelling breath. She said his face was also dirty and kept changing shape. She said the whole thing lasted 5 minutes at most. Immediately after my uncles fell, my aunt started freaking out and did what anyone would have done at the time. She prayed. She recited the Ayatul Kursi and immediately everyone could get up. They all immediately turned the radio off and that was it. No more music that night, I guess. In 2012, when my sister was dying of cancer, I moved into her tiny apartment with her. It was basically 2 rooms. She had the bedroom, and I slept on a nasty old couch stained with cat urine. As the disease progressed and the chemotherapy made her sicker, I bought an electronic wireless doorbell and affixed the button to the rail of her bed. That way, she could summon me with little effort, if she needed something. She felt guilty about using it, but I convinced her that it was okay and to bring it anytime she needed anything. It was a horrible time, but I was glad to be there with her. After she died and the medical supply rental company came and picked up the rented hospital bed, I had the doorbell sitting around on a credenza in the small room where I slept. One day, my sister's friend Mark was visiting. It was about a week after she had died, and Mark and I were both kind of in a fog of grief. I was chatting with Mark and happened to be looking at the doorbell. All of a sudden, I saw the red LED on the button light up and the doorbell chimed. The LED above the button only lit up if someone pushed it. Mark and I stopped talking for a few seconds and looked at the doorbell. Neither of us commented on it then. Some months later, Mark brought it up. He said that it seemed a bit spooky to him. I agreed, but didn't really know what to say about it. I no longer believe in ghosts. The doorbell never rang on its own again, that I witnessed. I lived in downtown Ventura, California for a number of years. When I first moved there, I would spend a lot of time wandering around alone, often at night. It is, or maybe was, a charming downtown area with some beautiful historic buildings. One of them is a big 4-story imposing bank building on the southwest corner of Maine and California. It was built in the 1920s and has hosted a succession of restaurants and retail establishments on the ground floor and offices above. One night, while wandering, I was waiting for the crosswalk light on the opposite side of Main Street. I happened to look up at the Earl Stanley Gardner building, as it's now named after the famous author and lawyer who had his office there, and saw a shadowy figure peering out from a second-floor window of a darkened office. It caught my attention because I couldn't make out a face or features, just a dim outline in the darkness and twin glints that appeared to be lights reflecting off of a pair of glasses. It struck me as odd that someone would be sitting in a darkened office staring out at people below, and I continued to stare back as I crossed the street towards the building. It looked to me as if the figure was watching me, and I could see the twin eyeglass glints until I got too close to the building and my view was blocked. The encounter puzzled me, as there was something about it that just seemed off. I kept thinking about it over the next few days. Who was up there? Why were the lights off? And why were they just sitting there staring at a few pedestrians below? A few days later, I did a web search on Earl Stanley Gardner, just because I wanted to see what he looked like. I knew virtually nothing about him at that point. When I saw his photograph, I felt chills. Glasses. He wore glasses. The same glasses I had seen in that night in the window, peering down at the street. When I saw his photograph, a serious, somewhat morose-looking man in a rumpled felt hat with downturned mouth and eyes, I felt that I was looking at the same face that I had seen in the window. I did say that I didn't actually see his face in the window. I didn't. Just a dark shape and the glint of eyeglasses. But when I saw that photograph, I knew it was the same person. I can't explain the feeling of knowing. It was just a feeling. Recognition. The building has a reputation for being haunted, whatever that's worth. I don't believe in ghosts anymore, but maybe because it's late and I can't sleep and it's a rare, dark, and stormy night out here in the desert, I'm indulging these ghostly thoughts and felt like sharing them with others. When I was a young child, my family lived in Lexington, Massachusetts. It's a small town close near Boston, and an area filled with historical colonial era houses and Revolutionary War battlefields. We moved away when I was 3, but my parents still had friends there. We went back to visit and stayed overnight one evening with a family that lived on the same street where we had lived, Laconia Street. The family had lived in a house that was probably built in the 1960s. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and getting up to use the bathroom. Movement in the corner of the room caught my eye. There was a young woman in a blue and white gingham dress with matching handkerchief on her head, sitting on a stool, bending over what appeared to be a laundry tub. It looked like she was washing clothes by hand. I stared at her sleepily for a few seconds. "Mom?" I remember saying. The woman took no notice of me, and the whole scene faded quickly away, and there was just the dark corner. I wasn't frightened, although at that age the notion of ghosts would sometimes cause me to scream in terror at night, until one of my parents came in to comfort me. I didn't know why I called out Mom, except that the woman was about my mother's age and build, and I couldn't fathom who else would be in the guest room that night. I like that memory because it kind of feels like I witnessed an echo in time of something from 200 years before that occurred at the same spot. It was fleeting and mundane, but it stuck with me for over 40 years.